Today we're going to be taking a look at a structured approach for interpreting an ECG using the rule of fours approach. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the four initial features, which involves taking a look at the clinical context, the rate, rhythm, and cardiac axis. Before we take a look at this in more detail, it's first worth understanding some basic principles surrounding ECGs. As you may know already, an electrocardiogram measures the electrical activity of the heart from different directions. To record this activity, we apply limb electrodes, which are placed on the right arm, and left leg, as well as precordial electrodes, which are placed on the anterior chest, numbered from V1 to V6. Now, one thing that you might notice is that although we have only 9 electrodes, we actually have 12 leads on our ECG, and that's because we can use the midpoints of the limb leads to create augmented virtual leads, known as AVR, AVL, and AVF. Adding these together gives us a total of 12 leads. Now, the purpose of having different leads is that it allows us to view the heart from different directions, and in general, the limb leads will provide us with a good view of the frontal plane of the heart from different angles, while the precordial chest leads will give us a good view of the horizontal plane. By combining both lead types together, we can therefore achieve a better localization of any pathologies which might be affecting the heart. One other aspect to recap is the cardiac conduction system through the heart. At first, an impulse is generated in the sinoatrial node, where it then spreads to the atria via a wave of depolarization. This depolarization causes both atria to contract and is responsible for the P wave formation on the ECG tracing. Following this, the impulse travels to the atrioventricular node, or AVN, where there's a short pause. This is indicated by a short, flat line on the tracing. The reason that we have this pause is to allow the atria to empty completely. In the next step, an impulse travels from the AVN to the ventricles via the bundle of His, and then travels up the Purkinje fibers to cause ventricular depolarization and subsequent ventricular contraction. Note how the ventricular depolarization is represented by the QRS complex on an ECG. Finally, in the last phase, the ventricles repolarize, and this results in the formation of a T wave on the tracing. Following this, the atria fill with blood again, and the entire process repeats. If we take a closer look at the ECG waveform, we can see how it's composed of different segments which reflect different parts of the cardiac cycle. We have the P wave at the start of the waveform, which corresponds to atrial depolarization, the QRS complex in the middle, which corresponds to ventricular depolarization, and the T wave at the end, which represents ventricular repolarization. Aside from this, we also have a range of intervals between different components of the waveform. For example, we have the PR interval, which is measured from the start of the P wave to the start of the QRS complex, as well as the ST segment, which is measured from the end of the QRS complex to the start of the T wave. One final interval to be aware of is the QT interval, which is measured from the start of the Q wave to the end of the T wave. These different intervals will play an important role when it comes to ECG interpretation. Now that we've understood the basic principles underlying ECG formation, we can move on to ECG interpretation itself. As mentioned at the start, we'll be using the structured rule of fours approach to do this. The first aspect that we can take a look at is the clinical context of the situation, and this involves checking the patient's name, date of birth, and time of reading on the ECG printout. We also ideally want to ask the patient about any chest pain symptoms and relevant past medical history. Finally, we also want to double check that the ECG leads have been placed appropriately to prevent the risk of an erroneous result. After establishing the clinical context, we can move on to calculating the heart rate from the tracing, and there are a few different ways to do this. One method involves counting the number of large squares between each QRS complex and dividing this value by 300. For example, in this case, you can see that we have around 3.5 squares between each QRS complex. So if we do 300 divided by 3.5, we end up with a value of around 86 beats per minute. Although this approach offers a quick way to calculate the heart rate, it doesn't always work, especially in cases of irregular rhythms as shown here. In these instances, the duration between QRS complexes is variable, so we can't use this 300 divided by method due to this variability. Instead, an alternative approach would be to count the number of QRS complexes or the number of R waves present in a 10-second strip, and then multiplying this value by 6 to give the total number in 1 minute. To demonstrate this, in this case we can see 9 QRS complexes in a 10-second strip. So if we calculate a value of 9 times 6, we get a value of 54 beats per minute for the heart rate. Importantly, after we measure the heart rate, it's always a good idea to mention whether the rate is normal, fast, or slow. A normal rate would be between 60 to 100 beats per minute, whereas a tachycardia or a fast rate would be greater than 100 beats per minute. Finally, a slow rate or a bradycardia would typically be less than 60 beats per minute. And in this final tracing, you can see that the rate would be around 300 divided by 8 squares, which gives us approximately 38 beats per minute. Let's now move on to see how we can assess the heart rhythm on an ECG. We kind of touched upon this earlier, but the main way that we do this is by measuring the distance between the peaks of the QRS complexes, otherwise known as the RR intervals. For example, in this case you can see that there are 5 large squares between the QRS complexes, and this pattern is constant, which suggests that this is a regular rhythm. Using the same logic, an irregular rhythm will therefore involve differing RR intervals, and this is what distinguishes a regular rhythm from an irregular one. We can actually subdivide irregular rhythms into different types. So for example, in the second case here, you can see how we have some short RR intervals and some longer ones, but they follow a set pattern. This is termed to be a regularly irregular rhythm, because although the overall rhythm is regular, there is still the pattern to it. In contrast, this third rhythm has no regularity to it, so all of the RR intervals are different and there's no pattern. This is therefore referred to as an irregularly irregular rhythm, and this would be caused by something like atrial fibrillation. Okay, so we've now had a look at the clinical context, the rate, and the rhythm, and the final part is calculating the cardiac axis. This can be defined as the overall direction of the heart's electrical depolarization, and we often use the direction of the QRS complex to gauge this. We can have different types of cardiac axes, and the normal range lies between -30 to 90 degrees. Some individuals may have what's known as a left axis deviation, where the cardiac axis lies between -30 and -90 degrees instead. This could be caused by something like left ventricular hypertrophy, where the enlargement of the left ventricle causes the axis to deviate. In the opposite way, some patients might have right axis deviation, where the angle is between 90 to 180 degrees instead, and this can be caused by right ventricular hypertrophy. In rarer cases, the angle might be between -90 to 180 degrees, and this is termed as an extreme axis deviation. This can be caused by pathologies such as ventricular arrhythmias or dextrocardia. Overall, you can see how different types of cardiac axes exist, and it's important to be able to work out the axis to identify any pathologies which might be present. One way of calculating the axis is by having a look at the ECG limb leads, and just as a reminder, these are the leads which are on the arms and legs of the patient. If we plot these leads on our diagram, you can see how each lead represents a slightly different angle of the heart. We can therefore use some mathematical principles or vector projections to measure the heart's electrical activity from different directions, and this enables us to work out the axis. Just to explain this principle in more detail, if we have an impulse which is traveling towards an ECG lead, this is picked up as a positive deflection on our tracing. In the opposite situation, an impulse which is traveling away from an ECG lead, this is seen as a negative deflection. If we have an impulse which is traveling perpendicular to a lead, this is detected as equiphasic on our tracing, which means that we have both a positive deflection and an equal negative deflection. Finally, if we have an impulse which is traveling at an angle to a lead, this will be picked up as a positive deflection as it approaches the lead, followed by a negative deflection as it leaves it. Keeping these principles in mind, let's take a look at how we can calculate the cardiac axis by combining different leads together. With the quadrant method, the main leads that we want to take a look at are leads 1 and AVF. If we take a look at lead 1 first, this will essentially tell us if the axis is towards the left or the right. When the majority of the cardiac impulse moves towards lead 1, this will be picked up as a positive deflection in that lead, and it will tell us that the axis lies on the left side of the heart. Alternatively, if the majority of the cardiac impulse is moving away from lead 1, this will be picked up as a negative deflection, and it will tell us that the axis lies towards the right side of the heart. Using the same logic, we can take a look at lead AVF, which can tell us if an axis is upwards or downwards in direction. For example, when the overall cardiac impulse is moving towards lead AVF, this will be picked up as a positive deflection, telling us that the axis is downwards. Alternatively, if the impulse is traveling away from lead AVF, this will be picked up as a negative deflection, telling us that the axis is upwards instead. You can see how we can combine the information from lead 1 and AVF to isolate the cardiac axis to a particular quadrant using this method. To understand how this works, let's take a look at an example scenario where we have the following ECG traces. In this instance, you can see that lead 1 is positive, which means that the impulse is traveling towards lead 1 and thereby occupying the left-hand region of the heart. At the same time, we can also see that lead AVF is positive. This means that the impulse is traveling towards that lead and occupying the lower region of the axis. On the diagram, you can now see that we have this area of intersection where both of these hemispheres are combining. This suggests that the axis is inside this area of intersection, or between 0 to 90 degrees. Combining this information together, we can say that if we have a positive lead 1 and a positive lead AVF, it indicates a normal cardiac axis. We can remember this as a thumbs up appearance because both lead 1 and AVF have a positive deflection. Let's now take a look at a second scenario where we have the following ECG traces. In this case, we can see that lead 1 has an overall negative deflection, which suggests that the impulse is moving away from lead 1 and occupying the right-hand side of the heart. Simultaneously, we can see that AVF is positive, which suggests that the impulse is moving towards that lead and occupying the lower region of the heart. Just like before, you can see that we have this area of intersection between 90 to 180 degrees, which suggests that the cardiac axis is lying in this area. Putting this information together, we can say that if we have a negative lead 1 and a positive AVF, this is representative of a right axis deviation. And one way to remember this is by the phrase right is reaching, because you can see that both QRS complexes are trying to reach one another. We can use the exact same process to calculate the other types of axes as well, and this method offers a quick and easy way to calculate the axis and therefore enables us to localize possible pathologies. Just to put everything in one place, we have a diagram here which outlines the different types of cardiac axes as well as what we would see in leads 1 and AVF. Just to review everything, we've now had a look at how to assess the 4 initial features on an ECG, including the clinical context, the rate, the rhythm, and the axis. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at the 4 waves and the different types of problems which can arise with these. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.